to this new episode of Minds Between Languages. Today we talk with Ana Rojo about emotions in translation and interpreting.
Hi and welcome to Minds Between Languages, Anna. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Wonderful, and it's wonderful to have you. Because you are one of those researchers who are literally pouring their heart into their work. You study emotions in translation and interpreting. Why should we study emotions? What is so interesting about it?
Oh, that's a really good question. And the answer is pretty obvious to me, at least, because emotions are a central part of or a central piece of the puzzle of how translation works. They're not just something in the background that interferes when we translate, but they're rather part of the translator's cognitive repertoire. So they influence or they shape how we pay attention, how we remember, how we make decisions. So if we really want to know how translation works, we just can't, or at least shouldn't, ignore them. Also, translators and interpreters often work with texts and situations that elicit strong emotional reactions, such as when interpreters work with refugees or at hospitals, or when translators continually work under really tight deadlines. And when sustained for a long period of time, the emotions triggered by those situations can actually not only affect their performance, but also their well-being, their mental health. So I guess if we know how emotions affect the whole process and we study them, we can better understand the challenges involved, and also we can channel them better to help improve the quality of translators' work and also the health of the professionals, the mental health.
Wonderful. So you mentioned emotions are part and parcel, actually, of our work as translators. You mentioned also some of the effects that emotions can have on our translation. Actually, this is something that you also studied. In one of the studies that you conducted, you asked translation students to translate violent content as opposed to more neutral content. What happened? Can you tell us more about the study and the results?
Yes. In that study, I actually, as you said, I compared students translating to different texts. The more neutral one was about a couple meeting online, and the more violent one was describing a case of gender violence. At that time, really, I was interested in see how they handled manner information. That is, the details about how the actions were performed, because actually that has been one of my lines of research when I work with cognitive linguistics. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you know, but what happens is that English tends to encode manner information more often than Spanish into the verb root.
No idea, but it's very
okay. While Spanish tends to express it outside the verb. So I'm talking about verbs such as beating, which means actually hitting, but also involves violence, right? So this makes manner a good testing ground, because when we translate these verbs into Spanish, from English into Spanish translators continuously have to decide whether to preserve those details, expressing them outside the verb, and often at the cost of a stylistic naturalness, or whether to omit them, which is usually the most natural option. So what I found out in this case was that the violent text seemed to pull students more deeply into the story. They felt more transported and more absorbed in what they were actually reading and translating. And this engagement also showed up in their translations. When they were translating the violent text, they often added more manner details and also made more mistakes. It seems like the emotional load of the content somehow push them to emphasize how the events unfolded to make, probably to make violence more vivid. So I guess the takeaway is that the emotions triggered by the source text don't only influence how translators feel, but also can shape the strategies they use.
Interesting. Emotions that really shape your translation. They can trigger more mistakes, but also at the same time, there was kind of this, what I thought, this motivation to carry over the emotions, right, that you felt
Exactly.
so deeply. Very interesting. And there's, of course, another factor that can affect translation, and that is very, very well known, which is time pressure. And this can be a really stressful experience. We may all know that. And this is also something that you investigated in one of your studies. You found that positive emotions decrease after a stressful translation task, but you also found that this high stress response can have a positive effect on the target text accuracy. Now, how's that?
Okay, sounds complicated, but I'll try to simplify it. Well, as you said, time pressure is a key topic in translation because we all know that it is a commonplace, a part of the translator's everyday job, since we always work under very tight deadlines. So we wanted to see what happens when when we work under different deadlines. Well, what we found out was that, and that was no surprise, participants reported to feel more anxious when they were working under really tight time pressure. But one thing is what they say they feel, and a different thing is what their bodies are telling us they're feeling. And in fact, in our experience, they often differ. In this case, we not only asked them about how stressed they were feeling, but also measured their cortisol level as a biological marker of stress.
How do you measure that, actually, the cortisol?
We measure it with we measured a salivary cortisol. So we used a salivate, which is like a small tube that has a cotton swab inside. You place it in your mouth, you move it around without biting it for a couple of minutes, and then you put it back. Okay, and then we extract the whole the saliva and go to the lab, and after a long, difficult process, we get the data. Right, so then the picture became more complex because we expected cortisol levels to rise with stress. But what we found out was that the cortisol level dropped as participants got absorbed in the work, okay, as they got concentrated on the task, which suggests that translating itself demands focus, and that focus can actually help regulating the body's stress response. Then we were also curious about the role of personality in all this. So we also looked at personality and how it influenced performance. And the picture got even more complex. We saw that when working under time pressure, people with a more anxious personality, what we called trait anxiety, slowed down, but also produced more accurate translations. They made less mistakes. They were particularly cautious about making mistakes. In contrast, those with higher self-esteem, with higher self-confidence, they attempted to translate more words. They thought, oh, yes, I can do this, so I'll try to translate as much as I can of the test, but they also made more mistakes. So I guess the answer is that stress is not always negative. For some people, the pressure sharpens attention, but also leads to better accuracy. For others, it encourages speed, but accuracy suffers. So what matters is how each person's emotional makeup and personality traits interact with the task, I guess.
And it really depends on how you handle your stress in the
Exactly.
end, right? This is what I understand from your description.
It does.
And then there's also another topic that came up in several of your papers, and that's the relationship between emotions and creativity. How do you often seem to say that emotions stir creativity, but how is that actually? How can emotions stir creativity?
Okay, well, basically, our research confirms what psychology has been showing for a long time, and that is that emotions shape the way we think, and in doing so, they influence creativity. And that influence is mediated by different factors. One is the value or valence, as they call it in psychology, of the emotion, described usually as positive or negative. So we all know happiness is positive, sadness is negative. And also by the intensity, described as high arousal or low arousal. So anger would be high arousal, sadness would be low arousal. So what we found out is that positive emotions broaden attention and open up thought processes, so to speak, so they make it easier to see alternatives and generate original solutions. So in one of our studies, for instance, we saw that positive emotions such as the satisfaction of receiving encouraging feedback on your work, on your translation, can actually foster flexibility of thought and promote more creative strategies. Negative emotions can also be useful. We have to bear that in mind, provided they're not too intense, they're not high arousal, because they tend to sharpen analytical skills and help focus attention. So frustration after receiving critical feedback, if managed well, can also push translators to identify errors and improve their work.
This is a little bit similar to your study on time pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, very similar. Yeah. So it all depends on how you handle the situation, as you said, and you know what it means to you.
What it means to you.
So another thing very interesting that we investigated is how background conditions influence the relationship, such as listening to background music while translating. So we had one experiment investigating this, and we saw that creativity increased when the emotional tone of the background music matched that of the text you were translating. This is particularly interesting for people who like translating while listening to background music. I don't know if you do or don't.
Absolutely. Whatever I do, I listen to music.
Okay, so remember that congruence between the emotion of the music and the text generate a positive state of alignment that opens the door to more creative solutions. And also a very interesting thing is that the relationship also seems to work the other way around. So creative language can also impact emotion or influence emotion. And we've learned this from our studies on audio description for the visually impaired people. And what we've found out is that a more poetic and creative audio description seems to channel better the emotional tone of the original product when, especially when the emotional load of the original product is particularly prominent, as in contemporary dance or avant-garde films. And finally, I can tell you that a very interesting thing we found also is that years of experience in translation and audio description seem to correlate with higher creative intelligence. So this is interesting because it may be telling us that only those with high creativity succeed in the professional market, but also may be telling us, and this is a more positive thing, I think, that experience not only builds technical skills, but also may strengthen the cognitive resources needed to generate original solutions.
So do I understand you correctly? You actually say that you can build up creativity by experience, maybe also because you don't have the same cognitive load anymore, so you have more resources actually to be creative?
Also, yes, that, and also because the work of translators involves strategies that foster creativity. All the time we're looking for different alternatives, all the time thinking about different translation possibilities, and that is a very good strategy to foster your creativity.
I'm also wondering whether there could be something about convergent and divergent thinking, so that with experience you just have a better feeling, where the trade-off is and what strategy to follow to really find the sweet spot that works for the source text.
That's a very good point as well. I reckon so. The more confident you are, the more confident you feel in the task, the more resources, as you're saying, the more cognitive resources you have, and the more you open up your thought processes, I suppose.
Wonderful. Very, very interesting. You have told us so much about emotions, what kind of effect they can have on the translation, on yourself, right? Now, what I would be interested also in knowing is what can we actually do to attenuate, especially maybe the effect of negative emotions, if we want to attenuate them, because we have also heard they can be quite positive and quite helpful, but there might be situations where we would like to lower the effect of negative emotions on our work and maybe also on ourselves. Is there something that we can do as translators or interpreters maybe also to do that?
Okay, I can try to give you some tips, I suppose. The first thing to remember is what you just said, that emotions are not simply good or bad. Okay, that negative emotions can also have positive effects, and positive emotions can have negative effects. But one thing we found out, and this is very important, I think, is that concentration on the task is one of the most effective ways to regulate emotion, and also even help us keeping physiological stress levels under control. So the problem really arises when there are some external factors that break that concentration, such as severe time pressure, or also a mismatch between your translator's own ideological beliefs and those expressed in the texts, or issues that are particularly socially or personally sensitive, such as gender violence or the COVID-19 pandemic. In these situations, then emotion becomes harder to regulate, more difficult, and it is difficult to keep concentration. That is why I would recommend to develop strategies to protect concentration. Some may be very practical and very obvious, such as taking short breaks to prevent fatigue, or using relaxation techniques such as breathing to reduce stress. Others can be more related to working strategies. When emotions are, for instance, elicited by the text, we can try to reframe the task. And by reframing it, I don't mean altering the content of the text, but rather changing the way we approach the task of translation. For example, keeping a more professional point of view, reminding us that our job is to render the text accurately. It doesn't matter what, or even from a more technical linguistic perspective, focusing, for instance, on terminology or anything that can help us to create distance and manage the emotional load.
The idea is, if I understand you correctly, the idea is actually to switch our attentional focus.
Exactly.
To focus on something that are not emotions.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just to rather concentrate on the task. And we can also use training to make students, I think this is very important, more aware of these factors, because if we expose students to these sort of challenging texts and situations in a safe environment, that may be helpful, and they may learn or practice forms of regulation.
I think this is very, very important also. We need probably some kind of practice, right? We need some exposure to these kind of challenging situations to know how we can deal with it, maybe also to explore different strategies, coping strategies also, and how to deal with them. And I would also say to make strategic use of our emotions, because as you said, they're not always bad, right? They can have very, very positive effects also, like an improved accuracy for negative emotions, or maybe also steering creativity. And that would be my next question. Is there something that we can do to strategically use our emotions to deliberately enhance our creativity in our translations?
I think we can. Some of the things we have already mentioned. Something as simple, for instance, as if we like listening to background music when we translate, then remember that choosing music that matches the emotional tone of the text can generate that sense of alignment that fosters creativity.
Is it actually important that I like the music?
That is a very good point. We haven't tested that, but I suppose it's always better if you like the music. Yeah, otherwise we're introducing some extra noise there that may interfere, that generates negative emotion. There are other strategies that can help. We have mentioned some of them, like taking short breaks or using relaxation techniques, but also some working strategies such as brainstorming different translation strategies before deciding, or even minimizing the use of technological tools can help stimulate creativity. Yeah, I have not mentioned this, but we also run a study in which we compared translating a highly creative text with or without dictionaries or search tools. And we found out that using these tools actually decreased mistakes, but also decreased creative solutions. So we have to be careful about and aware, at least, of using technology or too much of it. And also, the main thing, protecting concentration is key. So we can do things such as get organized in advance and prepare reference material, or even create a comfortable and pleasant working environment, that such as good lighting, a comfy chair, an ergonomic screen setup. All this can help and make us feel more comfortable and, foster our positive emotions and therefore creativity. I think it's just not only learning how to cope with emotions, but learning how to channel them. So, when we manage them well, then they can have positive effects. We can promote creativity and also improve the quality of our work. But if unmanaged, they can make work more difficult.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Anna, for this really, really captivating interview, for sharing your insights with us. It was wonderful to have you in Minds Between Languages.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to see you and to be able to have this chat with you. Thank you.